Missed my cue here. According to his promise, we are looking for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. Therefore, beloved, since you look for these things, be diligent to be found by him in peace, spotless and blameless, and grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. All right, so welcome. We are streaming. We are here. I'm going to go ahead and get started. We'll allow, Emilio is on his way, so he'll just join us in progress when he arrives. And I'm going to open us some prayer, and then I want to get back to that question you had there, because we're talking about these opening popes. So yeah, let's start with prayer. Almighty Father, we do thank you for being so faithful. Thank you for these students. Thank you for the blessings we have to read and learn. Father, we call upon your faithfulness to bless our time together as we review what we've learned. And I thank you and I praise you, Father, in Christ's name. Amen. So, yeah, this chapter, did you read this chapter? You read the whole reading? Okay, good. 16, 17, 18, pretty easy reading. Next week's is even easier. 19 and 20, it only covers 17 pages, so I think it's the shortest of all the readings that we've got going on. But this whole medieval era, I love it. I've done a ton of reading on it, outside reading, beyond just recreational reading on the Middle Ages, and I'd be glad to share some of those issues there as well. I do like his bibliography. I can take a picture of my bookshelf and provide another bibliography for Middle Ages. But I'll just start by saying Rodney Stark. I love Rodney Stark. Anything Rodney Stark has written. His early stuff was good. His later stuff got even better because he got saved in the meantime and came to a personal saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. Prior to that, he was a cultural Lutheran and thought he was a Christian. But his born-again experience really improved his writings, I think. So you were asking right before we started the streaming on the first pope, and it was not Peter. They say it was. Gregory didn't actually claim the title, but he wouldn't let other people take it either. You know, that this was at the phase where he became truly the first among equals, and then really the first without an equal in the head of the church. So, yeah. I think functionally, though, Leo was dominant when Rome was sacked and when he rescued Rome, paid a bribe, and stopped Attila from killing everybody. So he wielded a lot of secular power as well as religious power. And Leo was a good writer. His tome, his defense of theology was excellent. I'm glad that he defended the view there on that. I don't want to give it away because I think that's on your quiz. But all of these contrasts here. So anyway, I do accept, even though he didn't claim the title for himself, the title Pontifex Maximus is older than the Roman Empire, and it actually goes back to ancient Babylon. It had a time where it was in Pergamum, and then from Pergamum it went to Rome, and it was held by the Caesars. Julius Caesar claimed the title as Pontifex Maximus even before Christ. And so yeah, it's older than Christianity. And when the Christian emperor refused to take it because of his Christian convictions, then Damasus I took it as the Bishop of Rome. And so the Bishop of Rome has held that title ever since Damasus, Damasis, I think, or U.S. Yeah, you can get more of that with Hislop. I do like Hislop, and I like Larkin. They do some good work on that Roman history. All right, so the rise of the empire and Latin Teutonic Christianity. I've got a pet peeve with Cairns, is that what empire is he talking about here? Because we were just talking about the fall of the Roman Empire, and now we're actually approaching a different empire called the Holy Roman Empire. And but he just calls it the empire, and so sometimes it's a little obscure if we're not sure what era we're in. But yeah, Latin Teutonic Christianity. Remember, Latin, iron, Teutonic, clay. Okay, Teutonic means German. Okay, and so with iron and clay from Daniel chapter 2, and we have a synthesis. We have an attempted mixture. We have a failed mixture. We have a collapsed kingdom. We have a generational legacy of biological descendants from these two cultures. And this is what the Middle Ages are. The Middle Ages is the crucible in which Latin and Germanic cultures attempted to combine and broke apart, attempted to combine and broke apart repeatedly. And really the Middle Ages brought us the modern West, the modern Western Europe, the modern Western world. And that's the legacy of iron and clay. So marking this era, he does talk about why other people will use other dates. Okay, we've got a question here. Let's get you on the microphone there.
So the emperors were actually in Constantinople at this at the beginning of this
Yeah, from 330 onward, when Constantine moved the capital to Constantinople,
right.
The Eastern emperors were always there. The Western emperors had timeshares in Rome, in Ravenna, in Milan.
So which is the actual Roman Empire then? I mean, it seems to be like
It's a matter of opinion.
There's a, yeah.
Yeah. So there are people who will fiercely defend the Byzantine Empire, the one in the east from Constantinople, that lasted until 1453. That was overrun by the Ottoman Empire. And they're very ferocious about that. And I think it damages their understanding of Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 and the prophetic calendar. I think it's worthwhile to understand that Eastern Empire was more Greek than Roman. And they spoke Greek, they wrote in Greek, they ruled in Greek. They still called themselves Romans. But it was a satanic extension of a non-Roman empire calling themselves Romans. I think Satan also rebelled against that Daniel 2 message, and he sparked a revival of Persian culture. You know, we went from Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And Satan, after each of those were conquered, he then moved back in and started to revitalize some of those other ones. Like the Persian revitalization happened with Parthians and then with Sassanids. And that was a revival of the Persian culture and empire. But it's completely irrelevant as far as Daniel 2 is concerned. Likewise, the Byzantine extension of the Roman Empire is really, it's a revival of Greek culture, and it's completely irrelevant to the Daniel 2 statue. It's Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, and then it's the extension of Rome, which is feet and toes of iron and clay. That's the eschatological Rome. Eschatological Rome is the feet and toes of iron and clay. And that's what gets smashed by Jesus when he comes at Second Advent.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to figure out. So Constantine was in Constantinople.
Yes, he moved the capital there.
He moved the capital, and he himself, as the emperor.
One of a couple of emperors. And so even before Constantine, with Diocletian, they created a foursome where they had two Augustus and two Caesar ranks. And so there was an Augustus and a Caesar in the east, and Augustus and a Caesar in the west. And so really they had a divided kingdom into two, and even that two was divided into two more, making four. And that's a lot more Roman history than we really need to get into here.
Yeah, I get a little confused about the West.
Right.
And
so
when the emperor in Constantinople, continuously.
Right. So for our purposes, especially for church history, Western church history, especially for Daniel 2 prophecy studies, the East is irrelevant. It's only the West. And when Rome falls in the West, and when the Germans overrun, then we have the fulfillment of the clay into the iron and the collapse of that Western empire. So that's the only, the Byzantine is irrelevant, the Parthians and Sassanids are irrelevant, any revival of Babylonian culture is irrelevant. So, absolutely. All right. The date on this, did you have a question? Okay, the date on this, there are others that don't like the 590 date. Some begin medieval church history in 313 with the Edict of Toleration there. Others begin with the Council of Nicaea in 325. Others prefer 378. The Battle of Adrianople resulted in the migration of Visigoths into the empire. There's a loose estimate on that. 476 when the last Roman emperor was deposed. He chooses 590. I like it. Gregory does usher in a new era of power for the church in the West, and I'm okay accepting that. Likewise, the end of the Middle Ages, that's also loose and not always agreed upon. And remember, all of these eras are just labels that we're assigning to it. It's everything advanced day by day, moment by moment, as time always does. I enjoy using Martin Luther as a boundary, so that we have Gregory as a boundary, we have Luther as a boundary, and those are useful because of how transformative both of those men actually were. So anything before Gregory we can call ancient church history. Anything after Gregory we can call medieval church history. And then anything after Luther, we can, like Cairns, he calls it modern church history. We might want to break up the Reformation and have a later date for something truly modern. But then again, is there another name we can assign as transformative as Luther since Luther? I don't think there has been. So I'm okay with modern church history beginning in 1517 and the nailing of those theses on the church door. In the medieval era, the Roman Empire fragmented. Great word, and goes well with Daniel 2, with the collapse of the iron and the injection of the clay. Fragmented into Muslim North Africa, Asiatic, Byzantine, and European papal areas. Church-state relations became very important. A distinct Western European civilization emerged from the Christian and classical foundations. And the reason why it was different in the West was because the East still had an emperor. And so the Bishop of Constantinople was effectively subject to the Eastern emperor. And the church was a state church, and it was under government control. Whereas in the West, you had secular leaders and you had church leaders, and they were in tension, and they fought, and sometimes one had the upper hand or the other one had the upper hand, and it was really a different animal in the West than it was in the East. The name Middle Ages originated by Christopher Kellner in the 17th century, 1600s. In a handbook published around 1669, he thought of three divisions. And of course, his dates are interesting, 325, 1453. Ancient history for him ended when Christians were legal, right? So it's like, I think he resented Christianity, honestly, and because ending the Middle Ages with 1453 and the fall of Constantinople, I don't know, I find that interesting. When a flood of Greek scholars and manuscripts to the West, that's true, but it gets overemphasized. I'm going to try to dampen that a little bit here today. Yes, a flood of scholars, a flood of manuscripts, and we're thankful for that, but the West was not ignorant without those. They were enriched by them, but they were not hopelessly ignorant without them. And that'll be proven today too. If the men of the Renaissance thought of these years as dark ages, the Roman Catholics thought of them as the golden age of human history. And there was nothing better. It was the heyday. I mean, the Pope ruled, and he ruled the Western world. And to them, there was nothing better than that era. Protestant historians consider the Middle Ages the valley of the shadow, in which the pure church of the ancient era was corrupted, and it was a downhill slide. And it occasionally there were glimpses that somebody wanted to fix it, but they were usually burned at the stake and persecuted. Any attempted reform pre-Luther was dealt with harshly. And they tried to murder Luther. So just the sovereignty of God that let that succeed when the others did not. Remember, the Middle Ages were not static but dynamic. There was great learning. There was great technological advancements. This is where Rodney Stark goes into some amazing work on the technological advancements, the economic advancements, all of the things that happened and sometimes Protestant scholars try to claim it as a Protestant ethic, but much of it preceded the Reformation. Much of it was truly Catholic. It was Roman Catholic, and a lot of the philosophy of Rome provided for those secular advances. People attempted to set up a Christian civilization in which the past was integrated with the present in a meaningful synthesis. And honestly, when do you get a chance to just make a new civilization from scratch, right? When something like the Roman Empire, they've been around for 1,000 years, when the Roman Empire collapses, you got to set up something. So what do you set up? you know, and you're dealing with all these Visigoths, you're dealing with all these Germans coming in, so you can't rebuild Rome. You can't just set up something Gothic. What do you do? And so it ends up being this iron and clay mixture that attempts and does its best, and different issues there. So Gregory the Great, and very troubling times. And you can imagine, just imagine, maybe we'll be in a similar boat when America collapses, and we'll say, man, we saw it coming, and we still didn't believe it when it finally happened. And the Western Empire, it is true, Justin, some others from the east, Justinian, attempted to reconquer the West and rule it from Constantinople, but they never got far with those efforts. Gregory was solid on Latin, but horrible on Greek and Hebrew. Familiar with the writings of Ambrose, Jerome, and Augustine, but knew little of the classical literature or philosophy of Greece. I'm okay with that. I think it actually benefited his theology, honestly. But yeah, those are the main doctors of the Western Church. I think I put that on the quiz as well. He was made prefect of Rome, political position, and then ambassador to Constantinople. Isn't that interesting, where the former empire that's not an empire anymore sends an ambassador to the Eastern Empire. So he served in that capacity. And then he gave it all away. Man, he took a vow of poverty, his father's vast wealth. His mother donated a lot, created monasteries. He lived very humbly as a monk. Epitaph was God's consul. One of the noblest of the leaders of the Roman Church. And I won't dispute that. I don't want to get the impression out there, especially with one individual in particular who's streaming, very fond of the Roman legacy of Catholicism. I don't want to come across as just so anti-papacy that I hate every one of them in history. I don't. Gregory's a decent enough fellow. All right. Instrumental in winning the English to Christianity? Nope, hold on. To Roman Christianity, but there was already Celtic Christianity there. And so that introduced a conflict for the Anglo-Saxons between Celtic and Roman Christianity. Had some training in sacred learning, scholarship was marred by a lack of knowledge of the original languages, as I say. During the 7 years he was ambassador to Constantinople, he never even bothered to learn Greek. Greatest work was to expand the power of the Roman bishop. He disclaimed the title of pope, but he wouldn't let anybody else take it. And that's key. And it's not different, too, from Caesar. Julius Caesar would not take the title emperor. Augustus would not take the title. He called himself Augustus, and then Augustus became a title. But he was pope in all but name, no question. Assert spiritual supremacy of the Bishop of Rome, exercised episcopal care over the churches of Gaul, Spain, Britain, Africa, Italy, essentially the old Western Roman Empire. Appointed bishops and sent the pallium, the scarf of office, to those whose appointments he had made official or ratified. So, yeah, I'm glad we don't have palliums and scarfs and all the vestments. And really, they took them from their Roman history and made them religious vestments, that since they didn't have a senate, they didn't have political offices like that. John the Faster, makes me laugh every time I read it. Patriarch of Constantinople, claimed the title of ecumenical or universal bishop. Gregory immediately gave battle. Okay, well, Gregory should have been faster, except John was faster. All right. Anyway, it's a political thing, and it's ugly, and man, do Christians really act like this? Yeah, not willing to let anyone have this title either. And by now, I mean, we're 500 years after Christ. We are long down the road. That this genie's out of the bottle, right? This horse is out of the barn. This, pick your metaphor. This ship has already sailed. They've already got a concept in place where certain churches have dominion over daughter churches, in their region, in their parish, in their realm. We saw the Ethiopian church was under the reign of Alexandria. It was under the Egyptian church there. And so these regional things were established, and it just patterned after the Roman model, and It just takes a church organization and politicizes it in a Roman model, as if I have authority over what Pastor Cliff does at Lost Pines Bible Church, because, well, Austin's the capital. And obviously Austin's the capital. I'm the bishop of Austin. It means I'm the bishop of Texas. So all those Houston pastors and Dallas pastors, gotta claim it, right? Not at all. Anyway, this is it's a fun chapter. He disclaimed the title of supreme head. He would not let anyone else lay claim to the title. Exercise the papal power in fact, if not in name. No bishop or metropolitan in the West dared to go against his will, permitted no one elsewhere in the world to assert universal supremacy over the church. So he was okay. Constantinople could be in charge of Asia Minor and those regions in the east, no problem. Alexandria can be in charge over Ethiopia, great, but if you're going to claim universal, global, there can only be one. There can only be one. Just like, what was that movie with the sword and the decapitation? Highlander. There can only be one. All right. Roman missionaries, and here's where it talks about the Celtic Church. The Visigothic ruler renounced Arianism, so there's a plug. Being able to convert some of those Arians to Roman Christians, was huge. In fact, I think they had more endeavors that direction than they had in true evangelism, getting unbelievers saved. You got to get those Arians converted to Roman Christianity. Gregory was able to raise troops in the force of the Lombards to make peace and to win them from Arianism. Yeah, so he used the Franks to force the Lombards to convert. Also the organizer of the Gregorian chant. Yeah, so it's not on your quiz, but Gregory the First is the Gregory of the Gregorian chant. Gregory the Seventh is the Gregory of the Gregorian calendar. So you don't confuse your Gregories and things that are labeled the Gregorian something, which probably is limited to chants and calendars. And there's maybe more. Don't mix up your Gregories. He was a great preacher, although he allegorized, and wrote commentaries. Outstanding theologian, ranked with Jerome, Ambrose, Augustine as the four great doctors of the Western Church. Obviously, there'll be others that follow. Laid the groundwork for Thomas Aquinas. Believed that man was a sinner by birth and choice, but he softened Augustine's view by asserting that man did not inherit guilt from Adam, but only sin, as a disease to which all were subject. Maintained that the will is free and that only its goodness has been lost. Believed in predestination, but limited it to the elect. Grace is not irresistible, he believed. So yeah, he'd be a moderate Augustinian, a moderate Calvinist today. The canon of the Mass. All right, it is a landmark. It is a boundary between ancient and medieval. Everything after Gregory we can call medieval, from Gregory to Luther. Okay, questions on this chapter? I love this chapter. La Tourette, good R.W. Southern. Yeah, that's a good collection of resources there. I already mentioned my favorite. There's others. Cantor, he's a secular author on the Middle Ages. I've got a couple too. The Rise of Modern Europe discusses exactly the clash of Latin and Germanic worldviews, Latin and Germanic approaches to life, and it's a neat. The author doesn't know it, but he's a great commentary on Iron and Clay. Yes, sir. Is it turning red? I think the battery's getting weak.
It did turn red for a second. All right, is the Iron and Clay, is that something that continues to today, or
Yes.
and that will go until a rapture and revived Roman Empire, or?
Yeah, so the feet are iron and clay. Let me open up a Bible here, Daniel chapter 2. And the toes are iron and clay. So the fourth kingdom in Daniel 2:40, as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things. So like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. So Rome is the capstone of Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. But then something happens to Rome. And it's not a conquest like happened to Babylon, Persia, and Greece. It's a collapse. And so in that you saw the feet and the toes. Interesting, that's the first use of toes. Toes were not mentioned in the previous, in the narrative of the dream, but they were clearly included, and they're mentioned repeatedly here. You saw the feet and toes. So I believe right now we're in the feet. Right now we are in, because the legs are not iron and clay, the legs are iron. But the feet are iron and clay, and the toes are iron and clay. And so the injection of clay caused the iron to break down. The iron collapsed. And then you have feet. Right now today, and we are in the feet. And we're in the feet until we see the 10 toes appear. The 10 toes appear when the 10 horns appear on the beast, when the revived Roman Empire is a reality on this earth in a confederation of 10 iron and clay descended powers. So we haven't seen the toes yet. We're waiting on toes. Antichrist is under restraint. He cannot rise during the church age, so we'll never see him. But when he does arise, he uproots 3 horns. And so of the 10 horns, 3 of them are uprooted by Antichrist, who becomes the preeminent horn. And as I've discussed this, it's my opinion, the restraint does not apply to those 10 horns. We could see the 10 horns in the church age. They're not under the restraint the way he is under the restraint. So we may not, we might, we don't have to. So whenever those horns appear on the beast is when the toes appear on the feet, and then we will have reached this point here in verse 41. Notice a divided kingdom, a dissolved kingdom, a collapsed kingdom. It's not a conquered kingdom, but it is a divided kingdom. It will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw iron mixed with common clay, and it will have fragility, okay? As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And there are times America's the strongest thing this world's ever seen, and there's times America's the weakest, pathetic, woke, feminized thing that this world's ever seen. Yeah, the Western world today is Western Europe, America, Australia, New Zealand. It's what we call the Western world. And it's the world that is predominantly Latin Germanic. Okay? I think South America is more Latin, less Germanic. I think Scandinavia is more Germanic, less Latin. Okay? I think Russia and that's more Slavic, less Germanic. And so those are separate prophecies. Yeah, but the West today is Western Europe, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Yeah. Notice in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men. This is the only reference to seed, the only reference to biological descendants, to heritage, to generations that follow. And I also think when this toe feet, when the eschatological empire is smashed, in the days of those kings, those are the 10 toes, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed, like what happened to Babylon, Persia, Greece, and will not be left for another people, which is what happened to Rome. But it will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it will itself endure forever. And this, I just saw this last week, and I've taught this probably 20 times, but I've never seen this tandem of will never be destroyed and will not be left or will not be dissolved into another people. I think this passed on to another people. It will not be destroyed, like happened to Babylon, Persia, and Greece, and will not pass on to another people, like what happened to Rome. But the kingdom of God will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms. It will itself endure forever. So when John the Baptist said the kingdom of heaven is at hand, this is what they were hoping for. The stone from heaven crashing down, put an end to the Gentiles, and let's rule this world. The Jews were ready for their kingdom. at least some of them. All right. Anyway, excellent. And I love this stuff. By the way, I think I'm hoping this view gains more attention. I'm hoping that this view gains some scholarly attention in journals, in conferences, and in other places. Because I don't know that it's been spread as wide as it needs to be spread. All right. Christian losses and expansion. Are they really? Yes, they are. Particularly when Islam took over Africa and the East. I mean, that's a huge Christian loss. This is territory in the world that used to be predominantly Christian, or at least nominally Christian, and now it's overrun by Islam. But where did they expand? They expanded north, Scandinavia, the British Isles, even to the Russian eras came a little bit later. So there's never been an era in history of Europe when there were greater mass migrations than those following the breakup of the Roman Empire. Until now. Until now. Yeah, seriously. The coming from the Middle East, coming from Africa, just the millions that are crossing, I think statistically it dwarfs the centuries that we're looking at here in the 4th and 5th century. So the Mongol Huns, the Germanic Goths and Teutons. After 590, we have this new dynamic, this movement of people. Leo had huge influence there. Yeah, Magyars, Mongols. All right. Joey likes to talk about the Magyars because his family came from Hungary and some of the eras there. All right. The task of, and here's the thing. A lot of those inbound Germans were Arian Christians. They had been evangelized. They had absolutely been, remember the Gothic language, remember the Uphilus, the evangelist? Well, so they had the gospel, but they had an Arian heresy related to the deity of Christ. And so the Western Church had to not only absorb all the migrants, but try to convert them from Arianism to Roman Christianity. The task of winning the pagans and the heterodox Arians and the challenge of rival religion of Islam taxed the growing resources of the church to the limit. And yeah, that's a huge mission for a continent that is undergoing withdrawals. I mean, they're in collapse with the end of Rome. So yeah, and then the East, we don't blame them really for their failure of theology endeavors and missionary endeavors. They had their hands full with the Allahu Akbar crowd and what they were dealing with there. So this history too, just be advised, this Cairns is communicating the standard received narrative, what's usually referred to as the standard Islamic narrative, based upon the Hadith, based upon the Muslim legends, which are actually fairly recent. We can thank liberal German scholarship in the 19th century for that, and I think it was just as destructive as what they did in higher criticism for Christianity. But it gave Islam a mythology they never had otherwise, and they didn't have the mythology until a German scholar gave it to them in the 1800s.
Never heard?
Yeah, yeah. So if Muhammad had lived, anyway, all of these are the well-accepted legends, and they're worth looking into, and some websites and some books that I can recommend on answering some of those. All right. Leo in the east, Charles in the west, great heroes defending the Eastern Empire. The Eastern Empire, that battle was in 718, and that took place at Constantinople. They were defending a siege at Constantinople. And imagine how the world would have been different had Leo failed, the Isaurian. And then Charles Martel in France at Tours in 732. By that time, Spain is already overrun, but they had pushed beyond Spain up into France, and thankfully it was stopped there in 732. But the East was gone, the North Africa was gone, the Holy Land was gone, all of that. This is also mythology, the splendid Arabic civilization centered in Baghdad. It was splendid for a while because they were plundering Christian lands and they had enslaved Christian scientists and doctors and philosophers and whatnot. no true Muslim wanted anything to do with it. It was viewed as hostile to the Quran. And so they tolerated it for a time, and then eventually it just ended. A great series of articles was published years ago on jihadwatch.org by an author named Fjordman. And he's discredited, he's hated really, but by his views. He's claimed to be a white supremacist, which he's not. He's just an honest historian. But yeah, he wrote books about Eurabia and about the surrender of Europe to the Muslims, and writing on why, if they were so technologically advanced, and if we absolutely needed them, if we were clueless about classical knowledge, except we were able to get Islamic translations through Spain, that's just ridiculous. And why then, when we clashed in the Crusades, were we so dominant? What was the value of the stirrup in our cavalry's horses, and some of the other things that gave the stirrups? They didn't have stirrups, and in the West, the stirrup made the difference in the cavalry charges and in all the other battles with the cavalry, with the horses. Anyway, Rodney Stark will talk about that. How the West won is a great resource. Anyway, we can get through the rest of this Islamic mythology. Assimilated and passed on to Western Europe through Arabic Spain, the Greek philosophy of Aristotle. Garbage, all right? It had gone from Greek to Latin centuries prior, millennia prior. I mean, the Latins had the Greek philosophy, they had the Greek science, they had the Greek learning. So it was available in Latin. It was available to the West. Anyway, I didn't put any of that on your quiz because I think later study has made Cairns' work outdated. Eastern and western sections of the church were weakened by these losses of people and territory to Islam, but the losses in the east were much greater. The strong North African church dispersed, so that's Alexandria in Egypt, that's Carthage, that's Hippo, that's Cyrene. Cyrene was a great Christian center. Today we call it Benghazi, and how sad is that? The east, not only did they lose all that territory, but they were also subject to the emperor in Constantinople. So no wonder the West had more time for theology, more time for learning, more time for establishing universities, more time for sending forth missionaries. And you got good things going on here with, again, Celtic and Roman Christianity came to have some friction, but all in all, pagans were being converted, so that's a good thing. And then the scholarship, planted in the north by Celtic Christians, came into contact with the Roman Christians, different on many matters. The Celtics did not acknowledge the authority of the Pope. They did not always have Easter on the same day of the week. In other words, Easter didn't have to be on a Sunday. They just were following the Jewish calendar and tracked when Passover was taking place. Celtic monks could marry, as the Roman monks were not permitted to do. A different type of tonsure or haircut. I'm glad I don't have to get that. That's the Frisbee haircut. You know what I'm talking about, where you're bald in the middle and you have the fringe around the tonsure. People have asked about that. The significance of that haircut actually goes back to ancient Babylon, and I think Hislop addresses that. Can find that in the artwork in the inscriptions of ancient Babylon. So, same thing with the sign of the cross. This is a tau. This is as they weep for Tammuz. They make the tau, and there's other things. The Vestal Virgins, the rosary, the beads. So many of the things that became Roman Catholic ritual were Roman ritual, or were Babylonian ritual before they became Roman ritual. Yeah. All right. Theodore. Okay, I got to fix this for you. Page 172. Were you frustrated when you read in 668 Theodore was then sent to England to organize, and you're like, Theodore who? Who are we talking about here? And I'm surprised by the third edition this still hasn't been remedied. But this is Theodore of Tarsus, the same Tarsus Paul came from. Archbishop of Canterbury, and there's a great article on Theodore in Who's Who in Christian History. So yeah, good biography on him. If you want to research him some more, you'll find him in your fact book and can look up that. Anyway, he just calls him Theodore. Sent to England to organize English Christians under the Roman banner to set up dioceses and archbishoprics, in which many cases still exist in the Anglican Church today. And it was soon noted for scholarship. Okay, we're still talking in the 600s, in the 700s, long before we got those Greeks from Constantinople with their manuscripts. We didn't need the fall of Constantinople for scholarship to thrive in the West. It was already thriving. 7th century, 8th century. The schools of Jarrow and York. And even Charlemagne would borrow the top guy out of York and bring him to Germany, to his capital at Aachen, and bring Alcuin from the school of York to do the task. Bede, the Venerable Bede, another scholar, great church historian, the history of Christianity in England. We look to Bede as our primary source on that, written in 731. The church in England also sent to the continent of Europe missionaries who were instrumental in winning their Teutonic kinsmen to Roman Christianity. So, still that battle between the Roman version and the Arian version of Christianity. All right, Boniface, also known as Winifred, and his cousin. He had a female cousin, and ministered to the Germans east of the Rhine, and bringing them Roman Christianity as opposed to the Arian Christianity they had from Ulfilas in the earlier centuries. Cut down an oak. That's huge. Oh, the oaks are big in pagan German religion, even in Nazism. Read the works of Mark Musser when he writes about pagan oaks and writes about the Hitler environmental movement that was alive and well in the 30s and 40s. All right, Boniface and his cousin. He was the first to use women missionaries. Cousin Lioba came to help him in 748. She was put in charge of convents. All right. Sometime later, Charlemagne converted the Saxons by force of arms. Now, when you have a bulk conversion like that, how real is it? Okay, the king decides he's going to be Roman instead of Celtic, and then he demands that all of his population follow the Roman model. Well, you can force a culture on them. You can force attendance in church services for, Christmas and Easter only maybe. But are they born again? Have they placed their faith in Jesus Christ? In most cases, no. The story, though, is interesting to me. Also, when they were trying to choose between versions and they decided to what's the selling point? For me, celibacy would have been an anti-selling point, and I would have gone Celtic just so I could be married, But for others, they had other reasons why. There was a similar story in Ukraine when Vladimir was choosing between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic, and he eventually settled on Eastern Orthodox for whatever reason. And so Ukraine was established. Kievan Rus was founded as a Orthodox Christian kingdom. All right, then you get the Low Countries, Holland, Belgium. This guy is Willibrord. Ooh, and you know what? I think I left his name off of the quiz. I don't remember now. And then Italy, you got to convert those Lombards because they're Arian Christians who, we can doubt their salvation. So we convert them to Roman, and then they're good to go. The Arian Visigoths converted. Cyril and Methodius. Oh, these guys are important. Not only did they translate the Bible into Slavic, but they also adapted the Greek alphabet to a Cyrillic alphabet, named after this Cyril guy. And so the Cyrillic alphabet is essentially a modified Greek, and it's still used to this day by the Russians and the Ukrainians and Belarusians and Bulgarians and whoever else that uses the Cyrillic alphabet. And all that was done to put the Bible in the vulgar languages. So I like these stories, I like these examples because the Roman Catholics like to claim that, when Luther put the scriptures into German, it wasn't the first time. okay? And it was following in a tradition and in a heritage that had been done repeatedly in a variety of places. All right, questions on this chapter? These are going pretty quickly, and honestly, I didn't disagree with a whole lot in any of these. I did want to bring that one item to your attention about Islam. Yes, sir. We should just let you keep it until one of them wants it.
Well, so they use the term barbarians for anybody north of,
Yeah.
Italy and Roman Empire.
Uh-huh.
And when they came south, and they were already Christian,
Mm-hmm.
so what's the characteristic for barbarian that got them that name?
I think it was their illiteracy more than anything. It was their diet. It was their social customs, I think. I mean, for millennia, I mean, the Greeks always considered anybody that wasn't Greek was a barbarian. The Romans, you know, it's a lot of jingoism for, you know, we're the best. But then there's a legitimate thing that says, you know, what great buildings has your culture built? What works of literature? What poetry? And for these illiterate cultures, we say the same thing about, we call them barbarians, we call them savages in the West, the Native Americans. You know, Mayans had a writing system, but they didn't have a legacy of literature and things that passed down to the common people. It was very much like hieroglyphics. It was withheld within the priesthood and the power structure of the Mayan culture. So yeah, it's a pejorative used in that way. All right, so imperialism, empires making a comeback. And at this point too, it's worth, we do have extra time, it's worth considering political structures, okay? And keeping it biblical, keeping it historical, keeping it true, and not plunging into some of the mythology that academia puts forth today, okay? Because Islam is not the only one that has a received history and preaches it like it's history. A lot of the liberals today, a lot of the globalists today, a lot of the postmodern God haters today, they spend a lot of their time convincing their college people, students, that nationalism was invented in 1648. That nationalism is a recent phenomena. That after the 30 Years' War, when Europe was tired of fighting each other, and when they settled down, the Peace of Westphalia is a watershed. It is absolutely a watershed, but not in the way that they make it out to be, as if nation states never existed until the Peace of Westphalia. That is just flawed. It's on its face. We find that people groups would occupy a land and speak a language and identify as them. And so they used that model when they had French people speaking French in France, and Spanish people speaking Spanish in Spain, and English people speaking English in England. And so that was carved in stone, and that became parameters for things in Europe, Western Europe. But it was not the invention of nationalism. Nations have always been around, and nations are what fall to empires. Empires, by definition, are conglomerates of nations, all brought under an emperor. And so it's as old as the Tower of Babel, and all written records record that. And the written records of Egypt will talk about the Egyptians in Egypt as a nation state. And even if the terminology is, if they call themselves a kingdom or they call themselves whatever, they had a term for their polity, they had a term for their political organization. And so, you know, nobody had any question. Everybody knew who everybody was. They had borders, that's right. And even when they defied them to wage war, they were still borders, right? So the Babylonians knew they were Babylonian. The Assyrians knew they were Assyrian. The Hittites knew they were Hittites. And the Hittites in the Hittite language, living in Hittite land, or whatever they called it, their territory was their territory. And so nation states, what I taught last week in Genesis 10, That was the rule of human organization all the way up until now. Now, empires, of course, damage that, where the empire will claim hegemony over plural nations. But still, inside of all of those empires remain, maybe, those constituent nations. And unless they completely dissolve and they lose their culture, they lose their language, they start to identify with the imperial language. So, yeah. Anyway, that's just a side point, but I want to think in those things for future studies. This chapter kind of tries to bring order out of the chaos and tries to bring empire out of the chaos. And as a resurrection of Rome, did okay, because it too lasted 1,000 years. The Holy Roman Empire, if you date it with Charlemagne or date it with, earlier mayors, but typically most people will date it with Charlemagne, and crowned on Christmas Day of 800 A.D., crowned by the Pope, from 800 until Napoleon dissolved it in 1805. So the Holy Roman Empire lasted 1,005 years, off and on. Okay, we can discuss. It was not always as solid between Charlemagne and Otto. I mean, there was some loosey stuff in there after Charlemagne, but then from Otto the First, it was pretty well consolidated and stayed a feature till 1805, till Napoleon dissolved it in the Napoleonic conquest. So when my family emigrated, they emigrated from the Holy Roman Empire, and the Bollanders came to Philadelphia and swore allegiance to the King of England, but they were immigrants from the Holy Roman Empire. They were immigrants from Hesse-Kassel, the Landgraviate of Hesse-Kassel in the Holy Roman Empire. So I like this chapter and the chapters that follow. I've got histories of the Holy Roman Empire. There's other things that go into it, but it worked out well, and because it gives the Pope an army, and it gives Charlemagne a united faith in Roman Christianity. But it starts with the Merovingians and then the Carolingians. Those are just titles that roughly refer to the same thing, but there's a distinction. Merovingians, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, starting with Clovis, unified the Franks. So even the Franks have subgroups, tribes, and whatnot. But he brings all the Franks together under his control, married a Burgundian princess, so now we have peace between Franks and Burgundians. And these are all Germanic, okay? And so he married Clotilda. Well, not only did he unite the people groups, but she's born again, and he gets saved, and they accept the Roman model. So yeah, 496. The date is interesting. It's kind of a parallel to the BC date in the founding of Rome. But his sons were train wrecks, and Clovis' sons, and they can ride his coattails and they can party. I think of his sons like the Hunter Bidens of their day. They got all the daddy's money and they're doing whatever, but they were horrible leaders. And so the mayor of the palace actually ran the whole government in the name of the king. And so from Pippin onwards, Pippin of Heristal, from him onwards is now where we switch from Merovingian to Carolingian. Mayors of the palace, this would be the palace of the Franks. Clovis and his sons, and wherever it was they set up their capital. Was it in Aachen? I forget where they set up their capital. But wherever the Franks set up their capital, Clovis, his palace, it was the mayor was an office. It's similar to a steward in Lord of the Rings. You have an able steward that's actually running the country while the king is useless. Clovis was great. His sons were horrible. So yeah, Pippin. There's two Pippins. Pippin of Heristal, he was the first of these mayors. Reunited the divided possessions of Clovis. That was another thing about the Germans. The Germans would always subdivide constantly. At the death of their leader, it wasn't just his firstborn that took everything. All the sons took a share. So sometimes a kingdom would be split in two or split in three or split in four. and then you have cadet branches of different houses and things. So that's part of the brittleness of clay that didn't mesh well with the iron of Rome. Charles Martel, called the Hammerer. Who else was called the Hammer? But the Maccabees, Judas Maccabeus, he was also called the Hammer. So, big time gap between them, different context. But yeah, he's the one that defended, and he's a bastard, an illegitimate son of Pepin. But he took over the duties of mayor after 714, defended Western Europe against the Muslims that had gone through Spain, threatening to take over all of Western Europe. And really, the world would have been different if he would have lost at Tours. So thankfully for that. And then Charles' successor was Pepin, sometimes known as Pepin the Short, sometimes known as Pepin the Great. Which one did he prefer? Ruled jointly with his brother, and then brother decided to become a monk. So he became the first real king. He took the title of king, and he exercised all the authority of mayor. So he kind of combined king and mayor, and they said, okay, let's quit pretending. The mayor's been running this place for 2 generations now. And so when he became mayor, he took the title of king and handled that. All right. And then we get, but this is the Pepin the Short, or Pepin the Great, who made a land grant, gave a donation to the Pope. And so the Papal States is a consequence of this Frankish land grant that came to him from Pepin. So that's historically significant. Promised land in central Italy from Rome to Ravenna to Pope Stephen II in 754. This grant, known as the donation of Pepin, had special significance for the people of Rome. And again, 754 AD, paralleling with 754 BC, and they think, wow, these numbers are significant. Allotment was the foundation for the Papal States that the Pope held uninterruptedly until the unification of Italy in 1870. So essentially then the Papal States dissolved, and the only remaining Catholic secular territory is Vatican City. And you've got some 130 acres, whatever it is, of land that is sovereign territory of the Vatican, guarded by Swiss troops. The Swiss Guard they're still there, guarding the Vatican to this day. So, yeah. Anyway, other legends too. So the donation of Pepin should not be confused with the donation of Constantine, because that's myth. And it was a fraud that they perpetuated for centuries, that supposedly, the Pope healed Constantine and he was granted land and all this stuff. Those stories were combined in a document known as the Donation of Constantine, given in wide circulation throughout the Middle Ages, proven to be a fraud by Roman scholars, no less. So, again, historically interesting. Yeah, Lorenzo Valla. I need to read up on him some more. In 1440, he showed that their donation was a forgery, made some centuries after the events it's purported to describe. Purported. There's a good use of the word purported. Lorenzo Valla. I want to do more reading on him. The first document of real historical criticism. I mean, the research that he did and the proof that he put forth and his work discrediting the donation of Constantine, 1440, in the 15th century, we have historical criticism there. Then Charlemagne, son of Pepin the Short. And he was not short. He was very tall, 7 feet. And maybe Nephilim. I've wondered that all my life. I've wondered, not all my life, but since learning about his height and his intelligence and his passion for any number of things, why would Satan not have a Nephilim ready to go if Satan is in the process of reviving the Roman Empire in this effort of the Holy Roman Empire? Anyway, he had his own biographer named Einhard, and we learn a lot about him there. Military, top-notch. Administration, top-notch. Governance. I mean, he was the whole package. Yeah, you couldn't want a better political leader. And then his interest in academics, in literature, bringing Alcuin over from York was a real coup, I think. I mean, just talk about getting the top scholar of a land and bringing him to your land to build a library and to build a university. I wish you would talk more about these universities, because they already are, I mean, they're getting, I think it comes up in a later chapter. When does Oxford start? When does Cambridge start? When does all of these European, the one in Italy is probably the earliest. And it all happened centuries before those Greeks brought their manuscripts from the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Okay, so the Western Europe was not dependent upon the sacking of Constantinople to learn something. Church might be compared to this was his metaphor. The church might be compared to the soul, and the state to the body of man. All right, intriguing. Tell me more. It's a model, it's a diagram, it's a concept. I'm okay with it. Because society needs to have secular governance. Society needs to have a faith or religious. All right, interesting concept. Yeah, in 774 he was visiting Rome, wrapping up the defeat of the Lombards, reconfirmed Pepin's donation. He believed, however, that the ruler of the church should not dispute the decision of the ruler of the state. The bishop should also be subordinated to the head of state. So that was his view. You can be pope, you can be head of the universal church, great, but you still fall under the secular authority of the emperor. That was his view. Leo had another view. Okay, Leo the third. And when he was nearly assassinated, he fled and found refuge with Charlemagne. So Charlemagne went back to Rome with him and put him back in charge as the Pope and dealt with the threats. And then, so it was like, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Charlemagne made sure that Leo III could stay Pope, and Leo III put a crown on Charlemagne's head and proclaimed him the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So, emperor of the Romans. Not much of a Roman, is he? He's a German. He's a Frank. But he is the leader of this legacy of iron and clay, this legacy of Latin and Germanic cultures. And the heritage that has proceeded since, for 400 years, from the fall of Rome to Charlemagne, is now coalescing for one of several times. And these attempts that happen and then they break apart, they happen, they break apart, they happen, they break apart. Even, the Kaiser, what was he trying to do before World War I? And the unification of Germany was more than just the unification of Germany. The idea was that this German Reich was, again, the dream of the eschatological Roman Empire. Okay? And it didn't last. They're always dreaming of that. Napoleon was dreaming of that. The Russians are dreaming of that. They call Moscow the third Rome. They go from Rome to Constantinople to Moscow and say, here, the Russian Orthodox Church is the center of Christianity, and all these dreams and the czars and their conquest. What are they trying to conquer? Why? Why is the dream of empire still alive and well in 2025 AD? And what's Trump really about? If he's going to take Greenland and Panama and Gaza and we're going to expand. We're going to expand American sovereign territory to every continent in this world. I'm curious. Okay, what motivates that? This dream of, the Pax Americana is it just the latest incarnation of the Pax Romana? All right, so this was the Roman Empire revived in the West, revived in the rest. And this language of revived Roman Empire, because it's been attempted so many times. And it was a common phrase. I don't like it, but I understand it. And so when Hal Lindsey writes Late Great Planet Earth, or when other dispensational authors will speak about eschatological Rome, I wish they would just call it eschatological Rome. Instead, they call it the revived Roman Empire. And so now we have a concept that overlaps with secular history, and it becomes confusing. But this dream of unity. Roman Empire revived in the West. A new Rome, led by a Teuton, a German, took the place of the old Roman Empire. A universal empire existed beside a universal church. The classical and Christian heritage were now linked in a Christian empire. And wow, we're just on the verge of something wonderful, aren't we? I'm sure they thought so. I'm sure they thought this was just the neatest thing in the history of the world, and they were all excited about what was to come. But what does Daniel 2 tell us? How well do iron and clay mesh together? They don't. They can attempt to. They can forge, for limited times, but then they're going to collapse again every time. So seemed again to be realized Charlemagne had the largest territory under his control than any man had held since the fall of the empire. Universal spiritual empire of the papacy over men's souls now had its counterpart in the revived Roman Empire, the empire that Charlemagne had over the physical aspect of people's lives. The kingdom of God was thought to have two arms. The spiritual presided over the pope, was to have responsibility for men's souls. The temporal was to have responsibility for the physical well-being of man. Now, of course, none of that would ever even be possible to imagine had Augustine not written City of God. Okay? City of God did so much damage because it replaced Israel. It did away with the Jewish hope of a Jewish kingdom and a Jewish Messiah. It basically had the church now as the kingdom. It has this whole idea of the city of God and bringing about heaven on earth. And so now here's the Holy Roman Empire just following that same mindset. Pope and emperor give each other mutual support. And then ultimately you'll have friction there, and then they will fight amongst themselves. Yeah, so does the emperor have power from God over man? Does the pope exercise delegated power from the emperor over people's souls? Did God give supreme authority to the church, and so the pope delegates authority to the emperor? If both groups say, hey, God's the supreme, but he delegates to the emperor and through the emperor to the pope, that's one chain of command. Or does God reign supreme, delegate to the pope, and then through the pope delegates to the emperor? Okay, so how do we draw that chain of command? Or is it from God to both, emperor and pope, side by side, and then over secular and religious responsibilities? Anyway, so the rest of the Middle Ages is the history of fighting about that. Okay, and then sometimes very spiteful popes will make Henry stand barefoot in the snow for 3 days while he waits to get his audience and things like that. There's a lot of humiliation that happens by popes just to prove that they could and to humble the various kings at various times. But after the death of Charlemagne, his empire declined under his weak son. Here we go again. It's like we're reading the book of Judges, right? The judge dies, and then Israel goes back to idolatry again. So his weak son and warring grandsons, until the grandsons divided amongst themselves in the Treaty of Verdun in 843, after a long period of war. The imperial idea was again revived by a German prince named Otto in 962, and from 962 until 1806, the Holy Roman Empire was an honored institution in Europe, in spite of Voltaire's jibe that it was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. Okay? And he's burning in hell today, but Voltaire did come up with a few good phrases and had a good turn of phrase in different ways. But he's not wrong. The Holy Roman Empire was not holy, was not Roman, and you could call it an empire, but that's generous. All right, so there's his religious devotions for Charlemagne, his educational devotions. Neat material there. Turned to the scholars of England, brought Alcuin to Aachen. Yeah, Aachen. Is that how you pronounce that, Aachen? I visited once, and I should have learned how to pronounce it. Paul the deacon. There you go. See, who says that deacons never get remembered? Right there, Paul the deacon. The palace school of Charlemagne was an integral link in the chain of men and schools responsible for passing on to the medieval university the basic outlines of its curriculum. The trivium, the quadrivium, that had been derived from the Roman higher education by Marcianus Capella in the 5th century. The cultural activities of Charlemagne were an important step in the process by which the German people assimilated classical and Christian learning. Again, it's a hybrid. It is a hybrid. It's an amalgamation. Iron and clay are coming together, and in the generations, in the seeds of men, more and more of the culture is being preserved. More and more of the culture is developing, even though the Roman Empire itself is long gone. So Charlemagne himself delighted to listen to the reading of great books from the past, and according to his biographer, particularly liked Augustine's work, especially City of God. Well, of course. He was listening to it read to him, and he was out there building it in his empire. Also insisted that the abbot set up monastery schools so that interpreters of Scripture might be learned men who would understand and rightly interpret the Bible. And we can appreciate that. We can admire that. We want the best scholarship dealing with our manuscripts. He even offered to marry the daughter of the emperor in the East as a possibility of uniting East and West again, to get the Greek East Byzantine again rejoined to the Holy Roman Empire. It didn't work, but it was an interesting idea. Anyway, so yeah, Charlemagne, and so he's kind of a fulcrum in between Gregory and Luther, and so if you have a range of medieval history from Gregory to Luther, then put Charlemagne in the middle of that, and you got a great fulcrum upon which everything else balances. I think that works out well. Similar too, I would say, between Jesus and Gregory. We would have a fulcrum in the ancient realm with Constantine. I think Constantine would be a great fulcrum in 313 between Jesus and Gregory. So ancient church history likewise had a center point in Charlemagne, or in Constantine. Medieval church history has a center point in Charlemagne. And then modern church history, from Luther to the present, has a fulcrum. Where do we put that fulcrum? Ooh, now we're open for debate. Maybe we should invent something. Charles Spurgeon or somebody. I don't know. We got to pick somebody in, let's go with Darby. Ooh, that'll make the Covenant guys mad. In between Luther and the rapture, we have Darby, and the great fulcrum of dispensationalism in Protestant Western Christianity. All right, you heard it here first. If somebody writes that, let them know they're stealing from me and I want royalties. Now, the West and the East, I'm glad he includes these elements. I wish he would do more, because the East is more than just the Orthodox East, because you really have to get to you get to India, you get to China, you've got Nestorians, you've got other groups. You've got Coptic Christianity in Egypt, and you've got Egyptian Ethiopic Christianity. But nevertheless, I'm thankful he at least has segments here on the Orthodox Church in the East. But yeah, they were dealing with Muslims. They were also struggling with the iconoclastic controversy. These are the icons, the visible representation of the saints that they would draw, they would paint, they would pray to, they would worship. And in particular, East and West both had them, but East had more, and also East faced a lot of criticism from the Muslims. The Muslims said, that's just idolatry. How dare you have an image of Jesus? How dare you have an image of God? How dare you, and so they faced a lot of criticism there. Really, the main and only theologian in the East in this era is John of Damascus. We still have his writings. Last week we did talk about Theodore of Mopsuestia. He was earlier in ancient church history, and Golden Mouth, Chrysostom Golden Mouth. They were both in the early ancient church history. In medieval church history, the Eastern Church is, the theology there comes from John of Damascus. All right. Perhaps the fact that the church at Constantinople was subordinated to the authority of the emperor accounted for the slow development of Eastern Christianity. Yeah. I mean, Christianity just became churchianity very quickly. It just became the religion of the state. And it had all the reality that you just have your holidays, you go to your church, you put in, you do your nod to God and whatever, and you're great. You're great with the emperor, you're great with the empire, and you're a good person because you go to church. And you don't sit down because Orthodox churches don't have seats. They stand through the message. All right. It does kind of show that we're starting to divide West and East more and more. That split in 1054 didn't just happen overnight. It was a long time coming. And it goes back to the Nicene Creed. It goes back to some other distinctions and arguments that crept in between East and West. So we'll be looking at that shortly. Wow, short reading on this. St. Alcuin, Eleanor Ducat, Alcuin, friend of Charlemagne, 1951. All right. Every time I look at that, I think, I'd be interested in reading that, and then I forget about it until the next time I teach this chapter. So next week, chapters 19 and 20, the emergence of the Holy Roman Empire, the decline of the Carolingian Empire, and chapter 20, revival and schism in the church. Yep, because they're crashing towards 1054 at this point. And then the supremacy. Pretty much after the split. After the split, the Pope doesn't have to worry about whatever they're doing in the East. Goodbye, good riddance. We just can have a supreme papacy in the West that can really, really start pushing their authority over those secular kings, pushing their authority over France and England and Germany and Italy and Spain and whatever else they want to do. So yeah, we'll have those chapters the week after. So next week, see, today's the 9th. Next week is the 16th for ebb and flow, and then on the 23rd for supremacy, and then the 30th for medieval sunset. And that gets us to really the decay, the sinfulness, the luxurious. Here's what happens when a culture gets fat, dumb, and happy, and they just become so decadent that the Pope can't even keep track of all of his mistresses and all of his bastards and everything else. It's just ugly. So that's chapters 24 and 25. And when they couldn't reform themselves, when there was no salvaging, Luther said, well, let me take a shot at it. And so, basically, yeah, he didn't want to leave the Roman Church. He wanted to fix it. He wanted to drive the evil out. He wanted to reform the liturgy. He wanted to, a lot of dreams. And instead, there was just no reforming. All right, any questions, comments? Have you seen the quiz already? I posted the quiz last night, I think, before I went to bed. I was up late and I was bored. I was waiting for Sharon's flight was coming in at 11 o'clock, and I was waiting to pick her up at the airport. So I said, "Oh, okay. Let me put that quiz on the app for you guys." All right. Well then, I do think too. Looking forward, I don't see any need to cancel for Schaefer in March. I don't leave for that until Monday morning, so we can keep that going. There could be a Sunday in May. I think that, talked to him again this morning, I think that we may be doing a wedding on Sunday, May 18th. That's the date that Mark and Cheyenne have come up with. So I won't try to do a church history class on that Sunday if we're having a wedding here that afternoon. Otherwise, I don't know of any other Sundays where I'm not available until we get to August, until we get to, there are a couple Scrabble tournaments, but my priorities are teaching you guys and shepherding this flock. So I won't take a Sunday off for Scrabble until the national championship in August, and then I will be out of town for that. All right, Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you for this, all your blessings that you pour forth. We give you the praise and the glory, Father, in Christ's name. Amen.
Austin Bible Church is a grace ministry. No price is ever assigned to any video, audio, printed material, or anything provided by this ministry. Costs associated with such grace provision are paid in full by grace-oriented born-again believers in Jesus Christ, motivated by God the Holy Spirit, well-pleasing to God the Father. More information on our grace-giving policy and your opportunity to join in this Grace Financial Fellowship can be found at the link in the description below.